I want to thank everybody for joining us on our weekly Improving Talk session. Today, we'll be continuing this month's series on business process transformation. And I want to start the show by welcoming our guest of honor, Sean Antonello. Sean is part of the Improving Toronto Enterprise with a career focus on SAP and SAP Analytics, which includes data warehousing, reporting and analytics, planning, and legal consolidation. John's worked with organizations across North America in developing a solution roadmap and architecting optimal reporting and planning solutions. I'm thrilled to introduce him today with his talk, Leveraging SAP Low-Code Automation to Simplify Your Daily Activities. But before we start, I encourage you to use our Q&A feature so you can get your questions answered live, and I'll be reading those to him as they come in when there's space in the presentation. So let's delve into the transformative potential of low-code development with SAP's Analytics Toolkit. All right, Sean, the microphone is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. We will be talking about SAP low-code automation. As we get into it, sort of just give you a bit of an intro into who I am as a speaker. Been with Improving since we were acquired. My role is really Director of Consulting. I come from a background of working in the SAP Analytics partner space, close to 15 years at this point. Really an architect or a principal level individual. My day really is making sure that we're aligning technology with business requirements and business problems and helping organizations in their journey, whether that be data reporting and analytics or planning solutions. My background is in finance and FP&A, but really that's transcended, across typical finance and really around the organization. So I am the third session this month. Just wanted to call attention to Bill and Brad's previous sessions. I had a chance to look at watch them. They were terrific. Next week, Rob Ulisek will be talking about Copilot Studio and some of the AI components. So I would encourage everybody to join that next week on the 25th. So a bit of an agenda. We're going to walk through a bit of an intro to the topic we're going to talk about today. We're going to get into sort of reporting issues and common approaches that I've seen sort of across industries. And then really SAP's answer, which really resides within the BTP or Business Technology Platform. What that means from both an analytics and a data warehousing or data fabric component. And then we'll do a quick demo of some of the low code capabilities and what that would mean to sort of a day in the life of an end user. So we talk about typical challenges. What do we see? And I always like to start with, some metrics. In 2023, Gartner, did a survey, and it was less than 44% of organizations are saying that they are getting value through their existing reporting and analytics. In the SAP world, I'd say that that's probably a high percentage. It might even be lower than that. But even if we think holistically, less than half of the population of organizations are saying that they're actually seeing value in reporting. Why? SAP specific, the data is complex, okay? And there's a lot of customized processes that might be happening in ERP and in systems. And that really tends to drive difficulty in getting that data out, understanding that data, and working with that data. Really, primarily, why does that complexity exist? We're often dealing with fragmented data sources. So a lot of users, in the ERP world want to join that SAP data with other perhaps non-SAP sources or more detailed SAP sources. That's a difficult job to do, okay, to get the data out, put it somewhere, and then normalize it with another source. Users often have limited understanding of the data. They may understand the data that they see from their perspective, but not really the technical underpinnings. And SAP is notorious for German language and coding underneath the scenes. And so an end user may not quite understand what they're looking at from a technical perspective. They understand what they need or want from a business or a business semantic perspective. There's very often a heavy reliance on IT, and that really comes down to the complexity of the data. That can slow down the ability to get data and analytics in customers' hands in a timely fashion. And that often centers really around data governance and security. A lot of times it likes to be controlled from a technical or an IT perspective. Users don't have access to all of the data that they need, often lends itself to inconsistent approaches to reporting and analytics. Fundamentally, what happens, it means that different reports showing the same metrics or KPIs often show different results. That's never good. If two people are holding a report with a different value or a different result, definitely doesn't lead to accuracy or confidence in what we're looking at. So if we talk about the challenges, really, what are the issues? Data is complex. There's very often large data volumes that users are trying to access and comb through. There's a lack of real-time data. One of the primary things we hear from our customers is they want access to real-time data. Something's changing in the system. They want to be able to report on it and not wait for batch jobs to run in order to be able to access the latest and the greatest. You think of a finance person during month end, they don't want to have to wait. They want to be able to close the books and get the reporting that they need out. We're often dealing with highly customized reports that requires IT. That customization, like I said, sometimes comes just by virtue of the data, different modules in SAP and bringing that data together. There's a lot of interdependency. That interdependency often lends itself to very customized and specific report layouts for users. Mentioned this, but there is a definite lack of technical knowledge, business versus SAP terms, okay, and really integration with external data sources. The advent of cloud and hyperscalers and cloud offerings has been awesome, for the user community. But what it's really done is created a pretty complex web. We've got more data sources that we're trying to get data from, different data silos. We're trying to break those walls down, keep data context available, and bring that data together. And that lends itself to very sophisticated or complex data reporting requirements. If we think about how this has been addressed historically, you'll see sort of a delineation here between data and technology. Innovation from a reporting and analytics perspective has really kind of happened in silos. So it is a business group going out and saying, we need to solve a reporting need. We're going to focus on that reporting need and not look at this more from an enterprise perspective. What that's created is data being removed from its context. So, in the SAP world, you may have a sales order, but that sales order is attached to many different data modules, right? It could be customer and product information. It could be finance information. How do you merge and bring that data together and keep the context of the data? Hasn't really been an easy thing. And what that means is very often users are taking the data, putting it somewhere else, losing that context, and then trying to recreate it. Leads to cumbersome reporting, leads to errors within reporting. I'm going to say that there's been a fundamental error, and that really is that business groups look at technology and they don't really look at the data. So instead of saying, we need reporting for a specific use case, it's let's, grab some Power BI licenses, let's put the data in there and let's start reporting on it, versus taking a look at the data and what the actual requirements are, what you're trying to get out of the data, what decisions that's going to drive, who your target audience ultimately will be. The reverse happens, okay? And that leads to data silos. Obviously, what users are striving for and what we've heard loud and clear over the years is low code. How do we find a way to automate, things that are manual today in a very repeatable, easy to use, enterprise-wide fashion? Okay, and that's where SAP has really sort of stepped up their game, and we'll get into those solutions in just a few minutes. If we talk about where we're going, I always like to just take a step back and talk about, okay, what are SAP typically users typically doing today from a reporting perspective? There are three. Number one, rely on IT basically to provide them technology and reporting solution. So what happens? They typically, request a business use case or a report, say we need to look at our sales orders, or our accounts payable and aging of our accounts payable. We'll put a request into, IT or to a technical team. It'll sort of go through an extended development period, more of a waterfall cycle typically. That would be get some requirements, build, test, debug, and then move to production. All of this time, users still need to do this reporting. They may often look for workarounds, but relying on IT to do the job isn't necessarily a very quick operation. It typically leverages more high code tools, so things that IT is very comfortable with in the SAP world. That would be more legacy business objects reporting, very static or specific reports that sit on top of SAP Business Warehouse or other data sources. But really, it lends itself to a specific use case. Again, not looking more from an enterprise perspective, but things that lack real-time data, user ability to slice and dice, more of a static report that I'm getting that doesn't lend itself to the creation of a foundation that you can build additional reporting or like reporting use cases on. The next scenario that we would often see, let's take the data out of SAP, let's put it into a hyperscaler, an AWS, an Azure database, and let's put a reporting tool on top of it. What that means, honestly, is that you're likely leveraging a non-SAP reporting tool that is sort of low-code reporting solution. Could be something like Power BI. It even could be Excel. The problem with this approach, so SAP data is going to lose its context. So like I said, hierarchies, logic, the security of the data, all of the metadata and properties, it's lost. When it pushes out to direct from SAP to a hyperscaler, those relationships are gone. What tends to happen, it requires significant time and effort to maintain. So you're kind of rebuilding all of those relationships and hierarchies. And you can imagine as any of that master data changes, you're now making those changes in another system or report. Doesn't lend itself to low code in the sense that you are still required to work on back-end development of the data. It also creates silos and inconsistent results because now you've got different groups putting different reports together, relying on their own logic to rebuild some of those SAP data contexts. What a lot of customers in the SAP world don't know is it often also creates a compliance issue with SAP licensing. So that data that comes direct out of SAP and just gets thrown into a hyperscaler can actually violate your SAP license terms. Okay, so there is a better way, and I will talk through what that is. But this approach is something that we see very often, and it's something that, again, creates those data silos and isn't really a sustainable solution from an enterprise perspective. The last, we see this very often with finance folks, is let's build our own manual process. We'll call it automated, but it is in fact manual. We're going to extract the specific data set that we need. We're going to extract it on an ad hoc basis, and we're going to put a reporting solution on top. That is likely Excel. Very often it's Power BI. But it, again, creates that scenario where we lose business context and we're manually maintaining a custom report solution. It's, again, losing the ability to be low code and requires time to maintain. All of these solutions you'll see are creating the same sort of dynamic, which is siloed data, not an enterprise sort of approach, and the real potential for effort to maintain and inconsistency in results that we as users will find. So we look at it and we say that there are two needs. So the business has a specific need, and those needs really kind of will center often around self-service. So how do we access the business data that we need in our own terms to do what we want with, and how do we get access to real-time data? And that is really going to help drive decision-making at a point in time. That often is in misalignment with what IT or technology needs exist, which really are centralized governance. So how do we make sure that we're aligning from a governance and security perspective, and from a simplification perspective? How are we ensuring that our data landscape is sort of staying in a manageable fashion? So you'll sort of see that these might be opposing forces, okay? And it can create tension between, the business group and the IT group. Um, but centralized governance versus decentralized access don't necessarily conflict, okay? So centralized governance does not mean that from a business perspective, you can't have centralized data. So those two things can exist. There is a way that these can exist. And that really kind of centers around the business technology platform within SAP. So if we talk about business technology platform, it's a vast platform. We're talking about today from an analytics perspective is really a very integrated tool set that is SAP DataSphere. So really a data fabric underpinning with SAP Analytics Cloud, sort of an all-encompassing reporting and planning solution, highly integrated, which is going to give us sort of the elements that we see on the left side of this screen here. Open data access. So live access to data, whether it is SAP or non-SAP sourced, with the ability to virtualize or physically store the data within DataSphere. So we've got the capability to use it as a pass-through to other solutions, or bring the data in, persist it, and do modeling of that data. Shared business semantics. So again, we're not losing any of the business context of our SAP data. There's standard business content that exists. It understands the data elements and it can naturally bring it in. So I, as a non-technical user, can actually point to a data source and bring that data into DataSphere and report on it through SAC. Provides self-service. So this goes beyond departmental silos like we've talked about and sort of some of those other use cases, and really focuses more on the enterprise. How can we get all of that data brought in? How do we share that data together? And then assign users to specific data sets that can still mirror or match the security that they have within their SAP ERP system. Governance, so end-to-end, how do we administer and catalog the data, look at the lineage of data, so understand where it came from, what transformations, joins, or things have happened to the data, and how we see that coming out in terms of the data model that we can consume for reporting purposes. The idea here, a harmonized user experience, so an easier, faster onboarding, and really SAP Analytics Cloud representing a standard interface for reporting and analytics. It doesn't matter from an end user perspective what the source of the data is. You've got one system that you access for reports that's tapping into any of your SAP or non-SAP data. If we talk DataSphere in terms of its elements, you'll sort of see at its core or base our ability to connect to SAP and non-SAP data sources. You can really think of it as a comprehensive data service, okay, built on this business technology platform. It's going to serve and form the basis of a data fabric, but it is going to use a lot of the capabilities of ingesting data from these sources. And it could be, a data warehouse. It could be a data lake, an unstructured data or a semi-structured data source that lives out there, or a relational database. It doesn't matter. From a DataSphere perspective, we're agnostic. As long as we can point to it, we can bring that data in and start using it for consumption. At its core, DataSphere is really multi-layered. The idea here, how do you ingest and govern that data? How do you process the data? So it gives us the capability from a warehousing perspective to determine whether or not we're persisting the data, whether we're virtualizing, a live connection to another source. But like I said, has business content catalog that will maintain integrity of our SAP data, allow us to join it, in an analytic or relational model, but really give us insight into the data lineage, how that data has sort of sourced, where it's going. And then from an end user perspective, orchestrate it, build a data catalog for our end users to access, and really give users recommendations on this is your role or this is your profile. Here's the common data set across the organization that you can start building your own models off of, perhaps a subset of that data, but in fact giving users access to more data than they would necessarily need for any one specific reporting process. What sits on top of that is really the data consumption layer. We're going to talk about SAP Analytics Cloud, but there could be other reporting tools here, things like Power BI that would connect directly to our DataSphere environment. Something that SAP has done, and this would be absolutely new in the SAP world, has really opened up a lot of partnerships with, as you can see on the screen here, a lot of the affluent data elements of the world. So our Google Cloud, Databricks. So SAP has recognized that we can do a lot of the machine learning within our system, but we don't necessarily have to say it's DataSphere and nothing else. You may have Databricks. You may want to send or pass data through to Databricks to run some of those machine learning programs that already exist. Easy integration of that data. Confluent, another example where you might want an event-driven system. You have the ability to easily connect to Confluent and use that as a pass-through. I'm going to say that this is, in my experience with SAP in the past 15 years from an analytics perspective, quite innovative and quite rare, that it is such an open landscape in terms of welcoming, other data warehousing solutions that live out there to access and run through DataSphere. What sits on top of that is our SAP Analytics Cloud solution. So this SAP, non-SAP data sort of box, you can imagine could be DataSphere. It could be data that we're feeding directly into SAP Analytics Cloud. But this is really where an end user is going to sort of run through any of their processes to take data in, report on that data, whether it's, visualized data or more row and column reporting, have enterprise planning scenarios. So this is where we wanted to run our corporate plan. Same solution embedded within, very collaborative, easy to share, content with users in the system, and all augmented with machine learning and generative AI components, which we'll take a look at when we get to the demonstration. But the idea here is all of our users have, enterprise access for planning or analytic and business intelligence scenarios. So the combination of SAP Analytics Cloud with the DataSphere underpinnings is going to give a user in the SAP world easy access to bring information in, model that data, and report on it. In looking at some of the capabilities of low-code analytics, from a pure visualizations and reporting perspective, SAP Analytics Cloud offers a simple drag and drop interface for users. Okay, so where you're thinking of a type of visualization, it's as easy as inserting and adding your data source and some parameters. There's no coding required. Custom calculations, calculated dimensions, all things that can be added, again, in a graphical interface. So a user doesn't need to understand any coding in order to do this. They can take these dashboards or visually rich objects, they can comment on them, they can share it with users and collaborate. And the idea here is highly interactive. I can start from a dashboard, I can drill into any level of analysis, rank, filter, sort, all of those types of capabilities exist, but you can give users a very easy starting point, that is point to a data model and start consuming information. Data analyzer, this is somewhere where our users are definitely gravitating. So from a dashboard, from any object, you can enter the data analyzer area, which is going to let a user basically pivot and slice and dice the data model. So any of the dimensions that exist within that data model, I can pivot the data and get really into as much detail as I want. You can see here it's some contextual exploration. Okay, so it's going to potentially open a new browser. It's going to let somebody run an analysis. They can save it. They can reuse it, in the future as data is changing, or they can share it with other users, to get better insight and collaboration. We get to just ask, and this is where SAP Joule has sort of come in and is being highly integrated into the analytic platform. Just ask is really a natural language query that allows you to simply ask a question, have the system, answer that for you. Okay, so if I'm looking for very ad hoc information, I don't need to know a report to go to. I need to know that I'm just going to ask the question in very simplistic natural language. I'm going to let the system return the result, and I can then do further analysis of it here. The idea and the concept is giving information to consumers, let them consume the data, let them analyze the data. Joule is something that is being highly invested in on the analytics side. The roadmap is very strong. So what we're seeing over the next few quarterly releases will be, natural language to, build a dashboard. Instead of picking a specific object, I'm going to tell the system, build me a dashboard that shows me my gross margin. Let the system build the report for me. I can tweak as needed. As we look to the planning side, it's going to take away a lot of the manual coding that might happen for logic within calculations. I may just ask the system, build a depreciation calculation for my capital assets. Instead of me having to build the code, it's going to suggest the code for me and allow me to leverage that instead of sort of starting ground up. It's very cool, and there's a lot of capabilities here that certainly do exist. The last piece we'll touch on is Smart Insights, and this really is a contextual way that a user can point from any data element and really understand or get insight into what's contributing to the metric that they're looking at. Okay, so it's going to look across the data model, across all of the dimensions, and it's going to return a machine learning view of what the contributors are. Again, in a natural language perspective, it's going to add a visualization and really let a user drill down into any level of granularity. The old adage is, I'm seeing something that is out of line than what I expect. A user always thinks they know the answer. Something like Smart Insights is really an unbiased look. So it's not saying, hey, Sean, you think you understand why our revenue is off from target. It's actually going to look in the data model and it's going to suggest reasons based off of statistical models to say this is what's actually happening. Again, very cool things that users are able to take advantage of today. So before we jump into a demonstration, Daniel, I'm not sure if there's any questions. If there are, I'd be happy to answer, or we can get into demo.
We do have one question that's come in.
Okay.
This is, it says, we have a lot of Power BI reports in our organization. Can we connect DataSphere to Power BI reports?
That's a great question. We see this a lot, and I think SAP has recognized that perhaps their analytics solutions have been a little late to the game, and Microsoft and Power BI have really sort of infiltrated organizations. A good example, we talk about those siloed reporting use cases. A lot of organizations will have departments that have embraced Power BI and have used this as their specific element. So the short answer is yes. SAP DataSphere has a connector, so a standard connector to Power BI, so that again, it doesn't have to be a decision that we're only using SAP Analytics Cloud for reporting. It could be Power BI, it could be other reporting tools, but there is a standard connector that exists. The interesting thing about that connector, the Improving Vancouver enterprise was actually responsible for developing the connector for HANA, which DataSphere sits on, to Power BI.
We've got two more questions that have come in. Which is better option for users? SAP BW 7.x, the SAP DataSphere, or SAP BW 7x to SAP BW for HANA first and then SAP DataSphere?
Yeah, that's a great question. So obviously directionally in the roadmap, all roads point to DataSphere. DataSphere is obviously the cloud offering. BW is obviously more traditional on-prem, or could be hosted in the cloud. But ultimately, sort of everything is pointing to DataSphere. For customers who are on a journey and want to get to DataSphere, I would say that the 7.x to Datasphere Direct would be the best option. You could move to BW4 HANA and then hop to Datasphere. But ultimately, it's the same. There is a tool called BW Bridge where you could bring your BW models into Datasphere. The caveat is it is repurposing and bringing into Datasphere, but that BW model needs to exist. The other option would be to migrate, so entirely recreate those data flows in Datasphere. But from a technical perspective, there would be no advantage to moving to BW4 HANA before Datasphere. If the goal is to move to Datasphere, it would be from whatever version of BW that you're leveraging today.
The second question sounds like it's coming from it the other way. So can SAP for HANA to SAP Datasphere complete all of the user's reporting requirements without having SAP BW data to SAP Datasphere?
Yeah, correct. It can. So from S4 direct to Datasphere is the more optimal approach. So again, that business catalog can point direct to those CDS views that reside in the S4HANA system and consume for data warehousing and reporting purposes. So yeah, BW is not required in that equation. BW often exists because it was the data warehouse that came with ERP, and so very often we see a lot of development that lives within BW. But from an S4 perspective, BW is not required in the landscape. So I am just going to bounce over, to SAC, and we can just sort of walk through a bit of the capabilities, that we saw there. And you'll notice I'm just in Chrome, through a browser. This is my home page. So myself as a user, this is sort of where I can access. Users have a variety of ways that they can look, and access analytics. The first will be that just ask feature. So again, I'm a user. You can imagine that I'm asked a question or I want to understand something better. I can come into just ask. It's going to remember where I was, so we'll just sort of get rid of that question, and you'll see that I'm pointing to a data model. It's suggesting for me some specific attributes that exist. And so I'm simply going to start just typing and say, show units. That's what I'm interested. And we'll just say by product category. Okay, it's always going to try and understand, what I'm looking at here. So I could sort of just access or type this, but I'm just going to search. And so all I'm telling the system is show me number of units sold by product category. Okay, what SAC is going to do is give a few things. One, it's querying the database. It's telling me other questions that have been asked historically. It's going to give me some suggestions around questions that I may want to ask. But what it's done is it's showed me number of units sold by product category. Pretty, broad question. To a user, I've got some, ability here where I can sort. Perhaps I want to sort of see this from a unit perspective, highest to lowest. I can do some very simple analysis just to understand absolute percent, value differences between any elements. I could drill down. So if we had categories below or products that lived below this level, we could see it. It's always going to present by default in a visualized perspective. It's going to choose the visualization that makes sense for the data we're looking at. But I could easily switch this to table view, seeing that exact same data, units by product category displayed for me. Now, if I wanted to know more about this information, I could refine the search. So I could say, for a specific region, specific time period, or I could simply go into Data Analyzer. You'll see it's just going to open up an additional page. And Data Analyzer, like I said earlier, is really where a user can go to slice and dice data any way they want. And you'll see I'm looking at that same metric, units by product category. But you'll see that I'm now presented with a whole slew of additional options, dimensions that exist. Perhaps I want to see, product categories, but I want to bring country into my report. I can choose to bring it into rows or columns, or I could simply drag that dimension where I want it. Where I place it is going to be important. If I place it before product category, you're going to see it shows up in my report before product category, okay, giving me the ability here to quite simply look country by product category by number of units. I can see here that we're specifically filtered on units. I can get rid of that filter, and you'll see here that it's now showing me all of the measures that are available. So number of units, sales in dollars, expenses in dollars, giving me a lot more insight. I don't have to look at all of these. I could just, again, look at number of units, but it is giving me the ability to look and or slice and dice the data any way that I want. I could format this. So again, I could make this a little more easy to read by adding alternating rows. Perhaps I don't want to see decimal places. We're going to change that to 0. But I can start applying filters. So whether or not I choose to include something in the rows and columns of my report, I can also apply dimensional filters here to say, okay, great. We only want to, in this example, look at US. I can make that selection. The data is going to refresh. It's now showing me, as you can see here, just US from a country perspective. And I may want to bring additional information in here. So instead of product category, let's also look by brand, really giving a user the ability to access any level of granularity, self-serve, slice and dice across the dimensions that exist within that data model. I could save this view, okay, so that if I choose to save this, we'll call it Sean's view. What this is going to do is give me the ability to share this with other users. Now that it's saved, I could share this insight. So I could very easily say, other users on my team, I'm going to give you access, to this specific report. You can look at, you can analyze. It's going to give me a very easy way to collaborate with other users that live in my system, in my organization, and allow us better metrics and ability to track information. Okay, so we can add any type of calculation. So again, if we don't care about our units and we're looking, our sales dollars versus expenses, I may want to know the difference between these to understand, my gross margin as an example. I can add a calculation without any coding. Quite simply, I'm just going to start typing that we're looking at sales, and I want to subtract that from expenses. Okay, this is building a calculated field. I'm just going to give it a new name. We'll call it variance, just so that it shows up a little nicer in my report. But you'll see that it will now add it into my report. It's a dynamic calculation. If I change the structure of my report, we don't look by brand anymore, this calculation stays with my report. Again, it's going to give us tremendous flexibility. And from an end user perspective, something that is very easy to build, maintain, and look at on a regular basis. Okay, so I'm just going to close out of this. It's going to tell me that I don't have, latest changes saved. I'm okay with that. When I leave, I'm brought back exactly where I was. If I had the information and I got the answer that I wanted, I'm just going to exit, just ask. It's going to bring me back to my home page. Other ways that users can access content might be, let's go directly into a story. There's a ton of capability here in terms of, what we're specifically looking at. Now, I accessed a story from my homepage from a visualization. So SAC brought me specifically to that data visualization, okay? Because it understands that if that's where I navigated from, that's what I want to see. In this report, we're looking at some operating expenses trended over time. Users have a ton of capability here as well. Right click is going to allow me as a user to, as an example, add a predictive forecast. So if I want to understand how this is going to look or trend over time, I've got the capability to embed that within the report. Okay, so it's a very easy way that users can interact. Along those same lines, we might be looking at specific data metrics. We may say, that's great, my revenue is 920 million. It's green, it's highlighted here green because we created a conditional format that says that's a positive value, but I may want to compare this. And so again, no coding required, SAC is going to say, here are some valid combinations or things that you might want to compare against. Maybe we have a plan in the system and I want to understand variance of actual to plan as it pertains to my revenue. I can see we've got a negative variance. I might want to learn more about it. Again, a right click is going to give me that Smart Insights feature. That's now going to say, well, what do you want to know more about? The data point, that 920 million, or the variance that lives between actual and plan. I'm going to say variance because I'm really interested in what's specifically driving that or any elements that are driving that. The system is querying the database. It's looking for contributors. What it's doing, again, from a no-code perspective, so out of the box standard feature, is looking across the dimensions in my model. Okay, and I can see here that we've got a segment dimension. And if I expand this out, it's telling me it in a textual format. So from a segment perspective, we've got a large variance, so larger than the total variance being driven by service stations wet. Okay, I can see all of the other segments that exist. There aren't necessarily huge variances. I may want to know more about this, so I could continue to use Smart Insights to understand more about what's specifically happening there. Or I can say, okay, great, what's happening from a customer group perspective? Customer group A, it's driving the biggest amount of that variance, but it's also the largest customer group. So perhaps there's nothing more for me to understand there. But I can drill into any of these data aspects and get more information about it. If I'm interested in this service station's wet and what's driving that variance, I also have the ability to add a comment. So I can very simply either say that it's being caused by, service station wet, or I can tag a user. I just have to hit the @ symbol. I can find a user or a team that might be responsible. We'll pick on Andre. And I'm just going to say, can you help understand the variance? Now, we can have a collaborative conversation here. What's going to happen? Andre is going to get a notification. He's also going to get an email in his inbox telling him that I've asked a question with a link to the story, to this metric, and he's able to sort of collaborate. The idea here is collaboration within the system so that users have access, obviously, to commentary and sort of not that offline world that a lot of organizations live within. Very cool features, all at a user's fingertips. And then again, like I said, any of those data elements like data analyzer are available. So wherever I am, I've got the capability to drill in and learn more about the data that I'm looking at. Or be guided. We can create hyperlinks. So in this example, you can see when I hover over this underlined title, it's actually going to link me to another story. That story will tell me more information about revenue. So we have a very easy way to guide a user's experience throughout, any sort of journey that we would say makes sense for them to see. Okay, so I'm just going to bounce back to my home page. Everything that I've done here, is intact in the system. There's no need to save. That's a public report. It's going to respect, the security profile that lives on that data model. If I don't have access to certain data, I'm just not going to see it. So everything here is highly secured and protected. DataSphere is tightly integrated, like I said. So I'm using SAC to visualize the data, and I can go very easily to DataSphere to look at the data models, anything that's sort of consumed from there. And anybody from the SAP world who's seen BW, you can tell that DataSphere looks nothing like it. It's intended to be very business savvy. Sure, IT has a role. IT is probably going to define, security and spaces, and look at some of those connectors. But a business user should be able to come in and use any of the data sources, that have been connected. And we'll pick on our ActDoc-A connection from our S/4HANA system, look at the data, understand the data, have that semantic model tagging, but be able to sort of understand that, this is our fact source. Here are the dimensions that we're looking at, things like cost center, GL account, WBS element, company code, internal order, time. and understand the data. If we use the impact and lineage analysis, it's going to give us insight into all of the objects, and I can look from a dependency perspective. So as an end user, I'm able to trace back that, our account dimension came from, the account, and it is being passed through to the analytic model, that we're seeing. So at any point, I can see the specific modeling that's happened to bring the data in and the elements that are associated. But an end user has access to this information. It's integrated so that we're not passing information or connecting. Our SAC reports can live connect to DataSphere, meaning that we've got access to the most up-to-date information. So if a new journal entry is posted in our S/4HANA system, based off of that connection, I'd be able to refresh a report and instantaneously see that information. Okay, so all ways that users are very easily able to interact with the system. Okay, so before I jump back into sort of conclusion slide, any questions, Daniel, that have
Yeah,
come in?
we've got two questions come in. Does SAP charge any cost to send data out of SAP DataSphere to third-party tools like Snowflake, any cloud-based hyperscaler tool like GCP or AWS?
Yeah, so DataSphere is licensed a bit different than traditional SAP tools. So it uses a metric called capacity units. So if I'm using DataSphere, even as a pass-through, that I'm taking my SAP data and I'm through DataSphere pushing it out to a hyperscaler, so something that a lot of organizations do, keeping that business context intact. There is a usage of capacity units that does, obviously have a monthly charge associated with it. The difference between traditional BW is you had to size it for what you thought you were going to use. The concept in DataSphere is different. You can start with the smallest capacity units and start building up if you're using more. But yes, that pass-through activity does consume capacity units. There is a calculator that sort of helps determine what that requirement is based off of data volume. But yes, there would be a charge associated with that.
And how about data connectors? Can we connect SAP DataSphere to Snowflake via data connector like Power BI?
Yeah, you absolutely can. So Snowflake can be integrated either way that we can consume from or push data to. There is a connector. So there's a wealth of connectors that exist. If the idea is you're pushing it to Snowflake and Snowflake's connected to Power BI, I mean, that's a valid use case. It could also just flow into DataSphere and you could put Power BI directly on top of it to avoid an extra hop. Again, up to the organization, up to sort of where you are and invested. I sort of talked about Databricks, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a one or the other. It can be a both. The same would apply to Snowflake. You wouldn't necessarily have to make a decision that it's all DataSphere or all Snowflake. There may be valid reasons why you'd have a landscape that would include both. But yes, you can connect. I'm just going to come back to our slide. And really, this is the last slide. What I wanted to do was just a quick wrap up. We saw a piece of the business technology platform that is DataSphere and SAP Analytics Cloud. But this is really SAP's push to low cloud solutions that's going to allow us to provide real results in a rapid format. Even within an SAP landscape, we should always be looking for lower code solutions to enable our end users. That really falls within the product set that we saw today. Is it always low code? No, there's going to be times where we want to do custom development for, bigger or more complex applications based off of requirements. I'm going to say that can be done, and it is done in DataSphere and SAC. It allows for, JavaScript on the SAC side for really custom applications. But again, as an architect, you need to always sort of challenge those requirements, what's needed, why, and then educate the user around what that would potentially mean. Low-code platforms really can provide an option for enterprise class applications. That's something that necessarily always hasn't resonated. Obviously in the real world, enterprise systems tend to be, higher code and owned by IT. You can obviously see that shift is happening. Low code platforms definitely are being invested in and definitely are the way of the future. So that's it. This is my contact information. You are definitely most welcome to reach out if you have additional questions or saw anything that piques your interest. More than happy to continue the conversation.
Thank you very much. And thank you to everybody for joining us. We've got the direct contact links or phone number right there. Make sure you reach out directly to Sean to discuss where SAP Analytics and all this other stuff can work for you. Coming up next week will be Rob Julazek, Vice President of Consulting, and he's going to have a webinar titled Using Low to No Code AI to Take Knowledge Management to the Next Level. I've provided a link to sign up for that webinar in the chat, but you can also reach it by visiting the website at improving.com/thoughts/webinars. So register for that now, and you can be ready for next week. So until next time, thank you, everyone. Have a great day.